Before I start today's podcast, I wanted to share with you this little beauty that I've been working on, and I'm looking for developers and designers to join me in this journey to figure this out. It's completely open source, and it's going to allow us to create different interfaces. It's about interface design, but it's also about programming, and I'm thinking about different applications we could actually use this and utilize this for educational purposes to get more people into the DIY space. So if you're interested, let me know. Now, today's podcast is with Justin from Modern Sounds. And Justin is about to release his first instrument. It's called Pluto, and it's generative. It's beautiful. It's I'm really excited about projects like this because they're really innovative, but at the same time, they are not complicated to understand. They're not trying to push the boundaries too hard that they're like, what the hell is this? I mean, it seems like it's innovative, but I have no idea where to even start. This is a beautiful, very balanced instrument that allows you to create generative music and to play in a very organic way. What I found interesting about the process is that, first of all, Justin started as a graphic designer, then moved to UX and product design, and then now building instruments, which is kind of similar to my path as well. And he is putting all his knowledge into this thing, and you could really see how everything from the outside, the signifiers and the feedback people receive when they play the instrument, and the inside, how things are connected together and compartmentalized inside. It's really mindful, and it shows a designer thinking of how to tackle everything, how to make sure that everything is perfect for that musician that is going to play with it. So I find it really inspiring, and the whole conversation was very open-minded, and Justin was just trying to share as much knowledge as possible, which I always really appreciate. So without further ado, I'm Roy, this is the Synth Academy, Synth Design Podcast, and this is Modern Sounds.
I was trying to prepare for this. I was trying to go back to kind of figure out how did this start, and it was really this kind of iterative process where it started from like I wanted to learn about like microcontrollers, and I just I thought there was like something intriguing there. I hadn't been really like making music actively, and so I just started messing around with like these Arduino and like teensy based like things on a breadboard, and just kind of wanted just to get like go deeper into that. So it's like, okay, you can make a sound now, like, well, how do you make a sequence, and like what can you do with like a few pots to kind of like modify that sound? And it sort of gradually I kind of just realized that I wanted to make an instrument. And we were talking about kids. My first idea was like, I want to make something for my kids, like an instrument that they could use that's like intuitive enough and for them that can hold their interest. And it turned out that was really very difficult to do. And I think there's bits of that, so in the design and in the instrument still, but at some point I decided I just wanted to figure out how to make this like synth kind of like for myself. And gradually I started to see how, that other people could use it.
Right.
Most of my career in my adult life has been in design of some sort. And it started like I went to art school and studied graphic design. There's a place called the College for Creative Studies here in Detroit. So that's where I went. I started in engineering, but kind of figured out that wasn't as creative as I thought it was going to be. And so I ended up in design, and then, and I worked at, agencies, and eventually started doing this thing that was called product design, which, there wasn't that sort of title or role, when I started out in design, and worked on digital products like apps and web apps and things like that. So I think all that experience helps in what I'm doing now, but like the sort of tools and the fact that this is a physical thing that I'm making, I had to learn a lot to be able to, translate some of those skills and things to synths.
What are the things that you feel like you actually took heavily from digital product design?
I mean, I think there's some of the process maybe with like you sort of sketch things out and you prototype and you can kind of like have these different cycles where you kind of go back and forth between those things. If you have technical questions, you can answer those and, you know, kind of like fold that back into the process. I mean, it's some of that stuff translated, but this was also just like, this synth is also kind of my education in just like learning how to build this kind of stuff. I mean, it started off like I didn't know any electrical engineering, so I kind of made little projects for myself along the way to kind of learn those things. And I think each prototype kind of like ramped up in the sort of how complex it was and how, you know, all the different technical things I had to know.
Yeah. Do these prototypes still exist? Do you remember the first ones?
They do exist. I mean, I've got, this is like this one here. This was like the first real prototype.
Yeah,
And
this
it, you know,
looks pretty much like the final result.
yeah, I mean, it didn't have like the full enclosure.
Mhm.
And it does look a lot like it. I mean, there's no switches to change the voice, but I played with these like potentiometers that you could, they have the button like built in. So you just push down on the knob.
Mhm.
But they're kind of fussy and expensive and, you know, sort of sometimes they're hard to come by, especially now. But yeah, I've got some older prototypes too. I could show you some screenshots of those if you want.
Please go ahead.
Okay, let's see. Can you see that?
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful.
So this, yeah, this is like this.
You're
kind
such
of
a graphic designer.
right? The color coordinated.
No, just for
wires.
context, my background is graphic design. I heavily studied like color theory and typography and all sort of stuff that you probably are very much aware of. So I'm looking at this like, okay, yeah, I see where you're coming from. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. It's. I mean, looking at it now, it's like this thing is so crude, but it's also. I took a lot of time and care to make this thing, and it's like it's all hardwired. It's just like solid core wire, so it's like very heavy, very bulky. But yeah, this was just once I had. At this point, I had like, you know, some sketches, and I'd kind of tried to work through the interface, like in like Adobe Illustrator. I was like laying things out and trying to get things right. And there was a lot of work to get to this point, but this was really trying to get the experience as close as possible.
How long ago is that?
This is a couple years ago, maybe even like 3 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it's been, you know, it's been a slow process, and some of that is me just like learning, and some of it's just like, you know, this was like a side project for a long time, and it's like only in the last like year have I really tried to kind of ramp this up into like a real thing, like a real product that, you know, I want to make a lot of, that other people can use, that's, you know, it's dependable, it's all those things that should be.
Yeah. Do you have other examples of prototypes from the process, maybe earlier than that even?
Let's see. Yeah, this is, it's a bit of a stretch, but this is kind of like a you know, a sort of what do you call it, like a missing link in the sort of evolution, where I think I'd just like I'd made this interface so I could just experiment with a bunch of stuff in code. And it's just like I wanted a bunch of knobs so that I could control a bunch of different things. And the part of this that's like I think still in Pluto is that like I was playing with like two different sequences, two voices, and you could like adjust the way that it sort of produced like these like Euclidean patterns, you know, adjust like, you know, the sort of scale that it used. So in a way, this is like, it's kind of was Pluto without any of the patching.
Right.
And this was just like, I think a lot of this was just me trying to like learn how to like write things in C and like make code sort of like work and like use these controls in like an intuitive way.
Mm-hmm.
So this was like very, very early. You know, it's like still it's pretty crude, but in a way, this is Pluto with no patching. And I didn't even like realize that until I started to like look at these photos, where it's like, yeah, I think some of this code is like literally still in Pluto.
Cool. How old is that?
I mean, this is 3 years old at least, I'd say.
So at the time, was it the idea that like you wanted to actually build something that would be mass produced, or at least produced for other people, or was it just a fun thing for you, a learning experience?
I mean, at this point, I think it was just a learning experience, and I think I had been kind of away from making music for a while, so and I wanted to do something that like wasn't on a screen, because like my day job was like looking at things on a screen. I didn't want to make, you know, like some kind of screen-based interface or something like that. Like if something like the Mono Norns had been around at the time, like I might have been experimenting with a platform like that, you know, instead, where it's like you can do cool hardware stuff, some code stuff, but it's about this like, you know, this instrument, this physical instrument. So at this point, yeah, it was just really my own, just for myself, I was just experimenting. Right. And I think it's when I got into maybe kind of after this stage, like you could see this one, right? Mm-hmm. That's when I started to think like, yeah, maybe this is an instrument that, you know, I should try to make and other people can use it. You know, and I've been showing this with like some friends, and they've been watching the progress. So I think they seem interested. So I think that encouraged me to kind of keep going to see if like, could I make, you know, like an actual synth, an actual instrument?
Yeah. Do you have more screenshots you want to share, or you want to close the screen share?
Let's see. I mean, there's some good stuff in here. Like here's.
Yeah, you can quickly spacebar and just jump between them quickly, so we can get a sense of it.
Yeah, you can see that, can't you?
Oh, this is really different.
Yeah, so this
is a paper prototype.
This is a paper prototype. Cool. So this was kind of before I arrived at the, you know, the sort of size and general layout of Pluto. I had kind of previously like broken it down into these different modules. Like, you know, what's actually, let me back up for 1 second, because some of these sketches will kind of yeah, like this is like a very early attempt at like laying out the interface for Pluto. And it has a lot of the same things. It actually has like a lot more inputs, like these like, you know, really detailed controls for, you know, envelopes and, you know, voice frequency and things like that. And I think when I looked at this at the time, it was like, this looks way too hard to build. You know, this was like kind of my like where I wanted to go first. And it was, you know, there's like some different influences here. There's like, you know, Buchla music easel, and then there's the sort of like 80s Casio, which are like these like really accessible, like fun, approachable instruments. So, I mean, those were two, you know, major influences and kind of things I wanted to sort of incorporate in like embody in the design. But this was like, looked way too hard to build. So where I ended up was something, I think this is like the first interface layout that kind of resembles like what Pluto is now. Where you've got, you know, 2 sequences, and like a lot of the controls are really just like consolidated and, you know, reduced to just a few knobs and in a few you know, patch points. And then there was somewhere in that process where these like paper prototypes, where I wanted to make sure this like the physical layout of things actually made sense. And I initially had this kind of like stacked sort of layout with like a lot of like modulation, like that sort of horizontal strip in the middle, like was in the middle of the synth, and different, oscillators and gates and things on top, and a sort of keyboard at the bottom and sequencer. But I realized like it was like a real pain in the ass to patch with this kind of layout.
But hold on, before you move forward, what is this held on? All
This is
these.
just like a panavice that you would use to hold a circuit board.
Oh no, no, that's not what I mean. But like under
Oh,
it,
okay.
is everything connected to a PCB? Did you manufacture a PCB for it, or is it a
No,
strip board?
this is really dumb. This is just like cardboard with like laser printed paper on top, and I was just like poked holes with cables.
So there's no brain behind this. This is
There's
just
nothing. This was
right,
purely just to get the interface
just to get the feel
right.
of it.
Yeah, just to get the feel, and I like shoved some like trim pots in there. So it's really crude, but this was actually really helpful to figure out like how much space I wanted, you needed around the jacks. Some of that's determined by the actual physical part.
Yeah,
You
and
know,
and the one behind it, the one that's later and looks like Pluto now, this
yeah.
one is connected with regular pots, or is it also mounted on a PCB, or
Yeah, this is just like strip board
is it strip board?
with pots. Yeah, so this was fully functional.
Right.
Oh geez.
So what I'm curious to know is, so Matthew Spencer, from the community, from the Discord server, he connected between us, and he was really stoked about the whole process. He was like super happy that he actually got a chance to work um, with a pre-production versions, and it was like, this is so open-ended and really cool, and like you should really talk to Justin. Um, when did you start involving people that really felt like, okay, this is really like user testing? I'm now doing user testing. I'm getting feedback from people. And were there any specific um, feedback points that you felt like, whoa, this is really drastic. This is going to make a dramatic change on the design?
Yeah. Yeah. So earlier this year, yeah, I made a small number of units, like pre-production units, I call them, and sold those and invited all those people to join this Discord server to just hang out. Like it's a place to report issues, to share, cool things that you're working on, to ask questions. And yeah, I mean, I felt like the instrument was ready for that sort of level of like scrutiny, and just like people using it with all different gear, because like that's one of the principles that I felt was important. Like this should work with all your other gear. It's like Eurorack gear, or your like Korg Volca, or your pocket operator. And I don't have all of those devices, and people have got all this different gear, so they can test it out with those. And yeah, so it's been like an awesome experience to have that like little community there. And they've been super cool. They're like way more bugs than I think I thought there were. But they've been really great and patient. And like Matthew, actually, who introduced us, like he actually fried his Pluto. He plugged it in to something like that. I think it was like a micro freak or something.
Mm.
And something happened, so he like sent it to me, and it was great, because like he was super patient about it. I found out what the problem was. It was like something in the power circuit, and I later made changes, to sort of like prevent against that, and I fixed it and sent it back. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of little bits of feedback, I think, along the way. Some of it was, hardware stuff that's like, hey, this doesn't seem to work like it should. And so a lot of it's like code things where it's like, like regarding like MIDI or something like that, where someone plugged something in and it's just like didn't work out like I was supposed to, or I made an update and it broke some kind of like MIDI functionality.
Mm.
A lot of things like that.
Right. And you mentioned that it's all written in C.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's the core, like the brains behind, like inside Pluto, are is a Teensy 3.6.
Hmm.
So it's, you know, it's all Arduino IDE, and it's, yeah, written in C.
So are you writing it inside the Arduino environment, or are you actually using some of the Teensy audio library? Or yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of Teensy audio library in there, which is
Hmm.
great. You know, it's like for the oscillators and, you know, sort of the core things. And then I've written like some custom stuff like on top of that for like, you know, things like envelopes, you know, different way, like
Hmm.
there's like wave tables for each of the voices. There's like that mode for each of the two voices, and like, you know, figure out some cool ways to kind of blend between those wave tables. But yeah, the kind of like base level audio is still like all the teensy stuff, which is a great place to start from.
I wanted to know what's your relationship with generative music, because it seems like Pluto is heavily going towards, like, it's designed for someone to explore and have a relationship with the instrument itself. Like, the instrument has its own character, sort of like marbles in a sense from mutable instruments. I saw some like glimpse and pieces from like marbles in this, and I thought this was really beautiful because it's like a standalone thing with a synth, with two sequencers inside, but then it brings this feel of Eurorack into it, and one of the most iconic and most interesting modules, in my opinion, into this little thing. So I wanted to know, what's your relationship with generative music, and how do you see the vision of Pluto, and like the kind of people that you imagine would play it, the kind of things that they would make?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's great that you picked up on those things in the instrument. I mean, it's generative music is definitely something that's intrigues me, and it's like I think the one of the coolest things about Eurorack, which I mean I only really got into Eurorack like, you know, like 4 years ago or so.
Mm.
It was always interesting to me. It looked like kind of crazy and weird, but you know, like a friend kind of like helped me get started with it, and like the coolest part for me was that kind of like collaboration between you and the machine, where you can kind of set up a system and you like let it go, and you kind of see what happens, and you can kind of like nudge it in different directions. um but like that was like the coolest part, like rather than like I'm gonna set up a sequence and like compose this perfect thing, and it's, you know, it's gonna come out, you know, and that's like a valid way to like, there's no like right way to use synthesizers, but um and that kind of like very like formal way of like making music, like I'm gonna write like a verse and a chorus, um it's always been kind of hard for me. You know, it's like it's really it's easy to kind of get stuck with in sort of like making this like sort of like perfect thing.
Mm.
And so it was, you know, it's got kind of freeing to be able to, you know, kind of set up some system and kind of see what happened and sort of adjust it, and like, and it's, you get these like surprising moments that are like really, you know, these beautiful things come out, and like you had a hand in it, but it's like it's sort of also kind of arrived like, you know, on its just by itself out of the system. So, and I think also like in making Pluto, it's in a way I kind of like came up with this like very constrained hardware with like not that many knobs, you know, not that many patch points, but there's two sequencers. There's like there's a lot of stuff happening in there. And it'd be very boring if it was just like two 4-note sequences that you sort of like, you know, it could be, with given that its footprint and what it is, it could be, you know, quite boring. So that's why I kind of had to incorporate like these like generative elements and like bits of randomness, and yeah, and it was like I think marbles actually came out, you know, during the time that I was working on this, but like the Turing machine was like definitely an inspiration for some of the modes that you can like initiate, you know, with the clocks, where it's like it'll come up with like not something completely random, but these like kind of randomized um, Euclidean sequences is kind of where I arrived with that.
Yeah. It seems like when you're designing a generative instrument, especially if it's really aiming towards people creating generative music with it, there must be a like a fine line between making something boring, as you said, and something that would inspire someone to actually create something with it. Is there like, from your experience, is there like a formula or like an amount of controls that must be there? Because without, like, if you just reduce it in one, it will be like, okay, whatever, this is just playing music and I'm not that interested.
Yeah. Gosh. I mean, I think I don't know if there's a formula. I mean, I think it's like with in designing this thing though, it's like I've constantly been playing it myself, you know, and I think it's like those moments where you kind of get lost in it, or you get just like you get really distracted by this like instrument that you're making, where you know
Mhm.
maybe you're trying to like solve some issue or you tweak some code and you see if it works. But if like 5 minutes later you're like, oh, that's cool, you can kind of get lost in these like and kind of like using it and playing with it and like being surprised by what it does. I mean, that's the sort of intuitive process. But I don't know if there's like a formula, you know, and that I mean that's part of too why I wanted to get this out to more people is like I think this is fun, but you know, do others, you know, have that same experience?
Right. How do you document an instrument?
Document an instrument.
Like, I
I
mean,
mean,
in terms of like making the manual, um,
mm,
how do you get, I mean, it actually has quite a lot of features and a lot, like there are a lot of things that you can't just understand from looking at the instrument itself. Like what's your relationship with like really making now a PDF and
yeah,
explaining everything?
yeah. I mean, I did. That is like a thing that I've been working on, and that was one thing I wanted to kind of wait till I had this like community of people using it to do, because a lot of it was a lot of it was guided by their questions like, oh,
Mm,
how do I do this, or when I turn this knob it does the reverb sounds kind of weird, it's cool, but is that what it's supposed to do? So some of those questions kind of guided like the first became the first manual really. Okay, and let me it's like, okay, enough people have asked this question, let me it's not a Discord thread anymore. I need to kind of put this in one place.
mm,
And so I made like a draft manual just like in Google Docs, and people could comment on it.
mm.
And, you know, it was, and I kind of laid out the sort of like outline and sort of filled it in as, you know, as people needed. I mean, it still needs to be totally completed, but that was like a good way to do it. And it was like, you know, I'm thankful for everyone who was, you know, using their Pluto at home and were, you know, patient with that whole process. But that was the way I did it. That's the way I
Right.
documented it.
And what do you think about translating something like this into videos? Like, what is that? Like, I feel like at a certain point, there is not much need of written manuals, but it might be because I'm like a visual person. So for me, it's like I'm gonna watch the video and then I'm going to play around. And if I get stuck
Yeah.
with something, it probably means that like I need to go to the manual, but like I wish the manual would be like stupid simple, and sometimes it's like it's draining too much energy, so it just makes me play the instrument in a like in the way that I understand it, and that's it. What do you think we could actually do to make documentation more accessible when an instrument has these nifty features that you're like, as a designer, you're really hoping people are actually going to use this, but it can be a tad more complex to get into these.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think I'd love to think that people could just pick up Pluto and just start using it and be fine. And I think some people do. And that's just, I think I've learned that different people approach this differently, you know,
Mhm.
surprise. Like some people want to read the manual before they even like buy the instrument, and they're going to pour over it, you know, and they're kind of like thinking about getting this thing, like, what does it do? You know, what features does it have? Then there's people who just want to like, they see it makes these cool sounds, like I'm gonna get one and just like start patching, you know, as soon as it arrives. I mean, but I think video, I mean, I would love to make a video manual. I mean, I think that's like when it's more widely available, that's probably like what I'll rely on the most. And I think those kind of videos can kind of do, it's like dual purpose, like, hey, here's how to do this thing. Also, you can see how cool this sounds or like how fun this is. And I did actually make a video like right when I kind of put these initial units up for sale. I made this video where it's like I had, you know, like 200 people on this mailing list, people who are interested. And I thought, yeah, you know what? I probably should make a video just to kind of give a little more information on how this works. It just been like, you know, the occasional Instagram post, and it's, you know, it wasn't anything really informative. So I made this just like walkthrough video, and it was really only intended for this like small audience. It ended up getting like whatever 50,000 views or
I
something.
think so, yeah.
Yeah, which was like, you know, great validation, but it was like I thought it was just going to be this kind of boring like walkthrough. Hey, if you want to sit through all this, see how all these things work, you know, here's a very long video, mostly talking. But it was cool to see that response, and kind of, I guess, validates the whole like video approach. Like you're not going to get 50,000 people reading a manual. Also, no. It's just like a lot of work to document something, you know, in that kind of detail.
Yeah.
I mean, the one thing about Pluto though is like the sort of like one instruction that you can give someone is just like there's the outputs with like the black circles, and there's the inputs that are like the white circles with, you know, the outline, and all you have to do is patch an output to an input. That's really all you have to know. And if you like what you hear, keep going. If you don't like it, you know, plug in something else. But that's really the only thing you need to know to get started. Or if there's a kid who wants to try it, like that's the instruction I give them. Hey, try plugging this into this, and then you can kind of go from there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You said that it was actually based on Teensy. I wanted to ask something about that. Are you really using a Teensy there, or did you build your own Teensy?
Right now it's an actual Teensy.
It's an actual Teensy
soldered in there. Yeah, it's like right behind. Let me see if I have. This is like a sort of half demolished prototype. But yeah, there's like right here. I mean, I think eventually, like, yeah, I'll probably incorporate it into the circuit board, but it was just like time and cost. Like, didn't seem like a smart way to like spend time right now. You know, and at a certain scale, it'll make more sense, and it'll be like, yeah, it's kind of stupid that we're soldering this whole Teensy on there. But yeah, it's not at that point yet. It's not too ridiculous.
Yeah. But then you are actually building them by hand. There's no other way of doing this.
So far right now, yeah. I mean, the plan for like the production run, like that I'm, you know, gearing up to is like to have the boards like done, you know, by like a manufacturer, you know, maybe here in Michigan if I can arrange it. And they would do 90% of it. They do all the SMD parts. And then, you know, me, or I have some like, you know, people who are interested in helping assemble would do, you know, the Teensies and like kind of like the final bit of assembly. Yeah. So there's going to be some of it that's done by hand, but like my goal is to do as little of that as possible, you know, within reason and with, you know, with the cost that makes sense.
I have a question that I'm not really sure if you'd want to answer or not, so I'll just ask it, and like we can actually edit this out. About pricing.
Yeah.
I'm really curious, how do you price something? Like, you're coming from graphic design, you're a creator, you learn how to do all this stuff, you are spending hours and days and nights and like time that you could actually spend with your family. You're investing in this, and you're making something into. I mean, it's not a learning experience anymore. It is actually a physical thing that someone can get so inspired by that they could create their own music with. How do you define a price for something like this?
Yeah. Um, I mean, there's different approaches as I've learned, and I've talked to like friends who've had like hardware startups, and like you ask them, how they do it. Um, and I mean, there's like the sort of top down approach of like you look at the market, you look at other synths that are out there, and you say this kind of compares to whatever, like the O Coast or something like that, and like
Mhm.
that's a $500 device. And someone might decide between these two, like the sort of like hardware is like roughly similar, the footprint, whatever it is, or you might look at other things that are out there, and you can set a price that way. And then there's this sort of like bottom up approach where you say, hey, I'm spending whatever $100 to get this thing assembled, and like the other costs of like labor, and other things. There's lots of, you can get really into these like really fine like calculations with how you do that. And the typical markup is like 4 times the bill of materials. That's like the
Mm.
general rule of thumb.
Bill of
um
materials and labor.
yeah, I mean, I usually it's bill of materials, but I think you can incorporate labor in there if you
I
want.
mean,
And
if
it's
you
like,
if you need now to solder all the parts, this needs to be quantified as like, okay, so I built 10 in 3 hours, then 3 hours would cost this, and then you divide it, and then you say, okay, so one should cost this to make, including everything.
yeah, I mean, that's the general approach, right?
Mm.
And I think like the more that the bigger the scale, like if you're making thousands of things, like the labor should be very little for each one. But if you're making whatever 10 cents a week, there's probably a lot of labor
Hmm.
in that. So like those are the general approaches. But then there's also like, I started this thing a few years ago. There's like so much labor in like the code and like working through these ideas, and like how do you incorporate that into the cost? Like I don't know
You charge
exactly how you
5,000
do it.
euros for each of them.
It's right. It's $1 million synth.
It's
Exactly.
$1 million synth.
Um, so yeah, that's like the general approaches that I've found, for doing this, but there's no like one way that, and I've also done things like where I've created these like elaborate spreadsheets with like the cost and like, tax and like, all these different like complicated things. And it still kind of ends up roughly in that kind of like 4 times bill of
Hmm.
materials zone.
Right. Maybe I have one last question about the production of the physical product. What is it constructed from?
Yeah.
'Cause
So
like if you could break it down from the inside to the outside.
yeah, let me see. I'll grab this circuit board again. So yeah, so this is the inside. It's like pretty much a one-sided circuit board with a lot of service mount parts. On this side, yeah, this is a prototype, so it's got some like fixes and jumpers and things, and then switches and jacks. You have the teensy, which is like by far the most expensive part, is soldered here, which is like behind, that's behind where the keyboard is,
Mhm.
the touchpads. And then
But
I'll
there is
grab
also a
this here.
battery, right?
There's a battery.
So
So the battery, yeah,
where does it
connects.
sit?
The battery sits. Oh, this doesn't have the battery connector on it, but the battery sits is like stuck to the bottom plate. I'll get that for you. So the rest of like the enclosure is also this like PCB material.
Hmm.
So this is like the faceplate here. It has some tape stuck to it for some reason, but there's 4 little points on this that where it connects to the circuit board, it kind of sits on top like this.
With the lid lights.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
then the battery, this is like the bottom plate,
Mhm.
and the battery gets stuck to the bottom plate, and it connects to the circuit board with this little JST connector.
Mm.
And then, yeah, and then the sides are also this white PCB material. And it's basically this,
All sides?
all the sides.
Cool. I don't know
I
any
mean,
other instrument that actually has all the sides from PCB. That's really cool.
yeah, I mean, I think it's a pretty common way to do like a DIY
The front plate,
enclosure.
definitely.
Yeah. And I think, in a lot of Eurorack modules,
Mhm.
Nowadays do this. It's just like a very economical way to do it. It's like much cheaper than getting some kind of, like, especially for like a faceplate, like a milled, like aluminum,
Mm.
like that's screen printed or something. I mean, in the end, that looks amazing, but it's like many times more expensive, where you can like, you can send away for this stuff and get it back, from a place in China for within a week.
Mm.
Yeah. And I'd love to explore more different ways to do an enclosure in the future, like machined aluminum or like something like that, but it's going to be much more costly.
Yeah.
It would look amazing, but I think that would be this is a great place to start, or even like injection molded plastic. You have to do many units for that to really start to make sense.
Yeah. But how is it connected? Like the PCB from the side?
Mm-hmm. So it's really just like a sandwich. So the nuts on the jacks hold the faceplate down.
Yeah. Okay. Just like your rack.
Yep. And then on the back, there's some standoffs on the bottom of the circuit board. You can see here, there's like these holes in the corners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And there's 4 screws in the bottom that secure the back plate
Mm-hmm.
to the circuit board. And then you've got these side pieces that kind of slot in to the front and back plates.
Oh, so they're like holes for them. So they got it.
Right.
Cool.
Yeah. And I mean, I think like Bastel and like there's some other manufacturers out there that use this
The same
method.
technique for the sides as
Yeah.
well. Right.
You were talking about education.
Yeah. Go
Let
ahead.
me show you something real quick. This is like a prototype I made last year, and this looks a little bit crazy, but it's basically like this like one circuit board, like modular synth. Oh wait, it's upside down. And it's battery powered. It's got some like really basic analog circuits, and then the patching's done with these alligator clips, right to the board. So I had like a week or so, like between, like I was waiting on some prototypes for Pluto last year, and I'm like, I have had this idea. I just need to kind of like make some version of it that works, or it doesn't work. Just need to get it out there. But this was I mean, there's a lot that would need to change about this, but this was my first attempt at like a super low cost modular synth, basically. That's like, maybe it could be used by musicians, or like, maybe for education. But it was a fun thing to mess with.
I bet it looks really beautiful. It looks like a lot of fun. I would love to explore something like this.
Yeah. Well, if you want, we can talk more about it. If you wanted to explore any of the ideas there.
I would yes.
Okay.
I would yes.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yeah, man. This was really inspiring. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I did too. Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks for having me.